Ladies and gentlemen, we have seen the weekly candle close just a couple of days ago here, and there is a glimmer of good news in the swarming sea, the typhoon of bad news that has engulfed the last couple of months of price action since that September rejection from this critical yellow line going backwards to 2017. Now, that rejection, of course, is critical for a couple of reasons. One of them is that it was from that critical yellow line, as well as many other lines, quite frankly, but also it was important because it actually happened at our cyclical deadline. The cycle suggested that we would be seeing a top around that October-September region, and that is actually what we saw with 3 consecutive resistant retests off of that level and rejection. So pretty bad news from a price chart perspective, but I've always kind of split the bear case into two categories. One of them is a momentum chart breakdown, and one of them is the price chart breakdown. Now, very clearly, in my view, we have seen a momentum chart breakdown. What I mean by that is I look at the RSI, okay, the relative strength index, the prime momentum indicator of technical analysis, and I see on the 2-week chart, the RSI has been incredibly useful, incredibly valid on the Bitcoin chart, marking several macro tops and all of the cyclical tops in Bitcoin's history with this top white line here. I also look into the price action of this cycle specifically, and we can individually validate that every single important support and resistance retest, I should say, of critical levels in macro ranges in this cycle going back to 2023 have been primarily marked by the 2-week chart RSI triangle, which is now broken to the downside. So again, bringing it back to the two categories, we have category 1, which is momentum. That is broken to the downside. And that's one of the reasons I've been very cautious on this market alongside the cyclical evidence. Category 2, however, is the price chart itself. And we have not, at this point, seen a super convincing price chart breakdown. This kind of leaves me in that cautious but not outright bearish position because, of course, we need price chart validation for outright bearishness. Now, with that said, I'm completely on the sidelines. I have been since 120,000-ish, and I don't hold a position of optimism in this market right now. If I had to, gun to my head, if I had to answer what Bitcoin is seeing, I would probably say we're in the beginning of a bear market. I just know that it hasn't been fully validated yet due to the fact that the price chart is still holding on to a critical level such as the 50 simple moving average. We'll discuss this a little bit more in today's video. Long introduction. I will try and keep the video short. There's not too much to get into, but I want to really expand on this point. I also want to dive into altcoins briefly as well. So guys, let's get into it. The free content I post on this YouTube channel is made possible by the Bitunix Exchange. It's a global exchange, it's non-KYC, and it's never been hacked before. All three of these things matter a lot when it comes to a cryptocurrency exchange. You're trusting them to keep your money safe. You're trusting them not to scam you on fees or liquidation wicks or anything crazy like that. So go ahead and sign up down below with my link. You'll get a 15% lifetime trading fee discount exclusively with that link down below. Helps out the channel a lot. Let's get into the content. Although we haven't seen an actual price chart breakdown from something like the 50 simple moving average on the weekly chart, what we have seen is the cyclical requirements for a top be met. We've seen rejections from critical levels, all within Bitcoin's umbrella date range trend estimate, which pointed to a top in October. This, in combination with the momentum chart breakdown on the 2-week chart RSI, the triangle I mentioned before earlier in this video, which you can see on the screen right here, I can go ahead and punch in the critical line just so you can see exactly what I'm looking at once more. This momentum chart breakdown, along with the cyclical context, puts me in a position in which I'm forced logically, and I think anyone who is rational is looking at these charts in the right way under the light setting is forced rationally to be at least cautious, okay? I always stress that validations are important, but context is also important. The context right now is screaming that we could be at the start of a bear market. I find it very interesting looking at my YouTube community polls. I posted 2 polls this week, and I'll post another one tomorrow on the altcoin market, by the way. Tomorrow's video will be altcoin related, looking into specifically whether or not we will see an altcoin season again, whether or not altcoins are dead. But bringing it back to this topic, the first poll I posted was about a week ago, and I asked the question, is Bitcoin in a bull market correction or a bear market? Again, most of you guys, not an overwhelming majority, only 56%, but still most of you guys actually at that point said that Bitcoin was still probably in a bull market correction. And I could forgive that, given the fact that a week ago we still were at the start of November. The cyclical context pointed to a top in late October, early November, so it still would have been within the date range trend. I guarantee if I asked this question again, probably the majority of people would say bear market at this point, especially considering the price is lower than it was 7 days ago. I followed it up with a poll 4 days ago to get a little bit more information. Do you think Bitcoin will see a regular cyclical bear market bottom in October 2026? The reason I asked that question is because I want you guys to kind of answer me. I want your opinion on whether or not the cycle will hold. And the best way to do that is to ask the question, okay, what about the bear market? What about when Bitcoin will bottom? Will it be in October 2026 as the cycle suggests? And yeah, look, 59% of you think it would be. So most people on this YouTube channel, there was a little bit of caution and some doubt, some difference in opinion 7 days ago, but most people on this YouTube channel pretty much believe that the cycle is still intact and pretty much believe that the cycle will remain intact. Now, I think that's a rational position. I think that when we're looking at the Bitcoin data, all we have is the cycle. That's not to say it will last forever. It will eventually break. Every trend is inherently unsustainable. They can't last forever. Independent factors will snap at some point and the cycle will break. But at this point, it looks like the cycle is still maintaining. And look, although we haven't seen the price chart breakdown yet, although Bitcoin is still holding on, again, going back to the original chart we looked at in the introduction, although Bitcoin is still managing to hold on to that 50 SMA. And we just got a fresh weekly candle close above it after hovering below it for a few days there. That is not necessarily evidence of any sort of macro bullishness. That is merely evidence that there's a slight delay. All right, the momentum's still in the same position. The cyclical context is still in the same position. And we can dive into short term here and get an idea of what the short term looks like. I think it doesn't really matter personally. I think it's the macro we should be looking at, but perhaps in looking at the short term, we can actually identify a level in which Bitcoin would be back in the clear again. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm kind of prohibited in the analysis I can do on the iPad. Honestly, it's very frustrating trying to draw these lines in on an iPad, but a basic view of the short term right now is actually one of short-term strength. We have a critical support zone, okay, roughly in this price region down here. We've bounced from that support zone. That's where the 50-week SMA sits. That's just around 100,000 going up to something like 105,000, maybe where we are right now. There is a bullish descending wedge formation forming as well. The short term doesn't look too bad. Heck, even the medium term doesn't look particularly bad. But we need to understand there is critical resistance above, and overall, the basis of our caution is macro related. The basis of our caution is the triple rejection from this yellow line going from 2017 and the cyclical nature of that resistance zone and the date that underpinned that resistance zone. And so in order for Bitcoin to actually flip definitively bullish again, we need to be seeing quite a lot, right? This isn't a regular market environment anymore. This isn't what Bitcoin looked like in March when we just needed to get back above something like 94,000 to be bullish again. This is Bitcoin proving to us that the cycle is broken. That's what bullishness would entail right now, right? Bullishness would entail Bitcoin proving that the cycle is broken and we're going to skyrocket into 2026. And in order for it to prove that, it needs to do quite a lot, right? In my view, it probably needs to break all-time highs. When it comes to breaking the cycle, when it comes to skyrocketing to 2026, when it comes to breaking, price action and trends that have been in existence since 2012, it's not a 10% thing, guys. It's breaking all-time highs at a time period where we shouldn't be doing it at all. So Bitcoin has a lot to prove if it wants to move upwards here, if it wants to convince us that it's still bullish. And it has a lot more to prove than simply holding above the weekly level from the 50-week SMA for a couple more days than some people would have expected. Obviously, waiting for an all-time high break before flipping back to being bullish is quite frustrating, but in a way, that's kind of what the cycle mandates, right? All of the Bitcoin price action in existence is part of the cycle, and the cycle says the top is probably in. So in order to prove the cycle wrong, and hence in order to flip back to being macro bullish, we simply need to break all-time highs at a time that the cycle wouldn't expect. We simply need to skyrocket above 126,000. And that means that, you would be missing a lot of that move. Now, perhaps you can try and front run that if Bitcoin, for example, breaks back above the momentum indicator, which is the RSI. If it breaks back above that yellow support line on the RSI, which is part of the RSI triangle, then maybe that's a sign of bullishness. Then maybe that's a sign the momentum breakdown's been invalidated and it could be foreshadowing good things to come. but that's still a ways away, right? That would involve Bitcoin getting back above something like maybe 115, 116,000. It's actually quite hard to say because the moving average of the RSI doesn't move in sync with price action. But if that strength comes, of course, we will address it when it does come. At this point, it's simply not here yet. Yes, we have some good signs on the medium-term chart. Yes, we did just hold above the critical support level I'm looking at, which is the 50 SMA. We've got that bullish descending wedge formation. We look okay. We're on support here. We could bounce. But the question is that bounce going to actually lead to anything? Or will it just be a dead cat bounce like we saw in 2021? At this point, there's no real reason to believe that it won't be anything other than a dead cat bounce. And that's why I still remain in my position of caution. Not outright bearishness, but caution. I'm ready to adapt if the situation changes, but that simple weekly candle close holding this level is not enough to get me to adapt my position at this point. Bitcoin still has quite a lot to prove. So guys, just to follow up, I am going to be filming on an iPad for about the next month. Upload frequency will be relatively inconsistent, maybe once every 3 or 4 days, but in the videos, I will try and keep as much depth as I can. Sometimes flicking through the charts on the iPad can be difficult, but I can actually get the words out quite well, which is what I did today, I feel like. So let me know what you think down below, if it was adequate or not. And go ahead and check out the Bitunix Exchange. They currently have a promotion on. If you deposit, you get a 20% futures bonus. So you deposit, for example, 1,000, you get 200 USD given to you in a futures bonus. That's between now and the 16th of November. You can also just check out the link down below. To get that, first of all, use the link down below, but also with that link down below, get that 15% exclusive lifetime trading fee discount just with my referral link down below on Bitunix. It's a global exchange. It's non-KYC. It's never been hacked before. What more do you want from an exchange? I don't know. That's why I use it personally, right? It's the best one I can find. So use that link down below to sign up, help out the channel, help out yourself. Guys, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you soon.